That was dumb. All right, it's really easy for me to get focused on this tiny detail and just really, really focus down on it, and then just completely forget what the rest of the whole thing. Yeah, Tammy's going like, "Okay, Gerald, land the plane. Why are there so many details? Like, just tell me what's the gist? Give me the gist of the thing." So you summarize. Now, when you summarize in the past tense. All right, so in the past tense, why do we want to do that? Because what we want to do is we want to know what the text is saying. Now, we want to know what it's saying, but it's what Jesus said. He said it to some people at a certain time back in the past. So if we want to make sure we keep our interpretation correct, one of the observations is this is something that it was in the past. Now, once we find out what the kind of the central idea of the text is, then we can take that, make it a theological principle that can then be applied into the future. There might be some details that really only apply to the context in which it is given, and that's what we need to parse out. So keeping it in the past tense, and this will make sense when we go back through this. Keeping it in the past tense will help us to understand what it meant to the original audience. What it meant to the original audience. A text can never mean what it never meant. It can't mean for me something different than it meant for the original audience. So, put it in the past tense. And then we keep it in the past tense so then we get like this. We still have this huge section. We break it down into smaller sections, see the flow of thought. And then we need to break that down into one sentence. How can we summarize this whole passage into one sentence? You're going to lose all the details if you're going to summarize it in one sentence. But that's how you get the gist of a passage. And you can do this for any length of passage. Usually you want to break it down into paragraphs. Paragraphs are units of thought that you can summarize into one sentence. You can get a theological point and then make application after that. So, summarize into one central idea, and then application. And then your application, you'll have to draw on your observations. And this will become clear when we get into Matthew 16. You'll have to draw on your observations to make sure that your application is appropriate. And same with your interpretation. So, we're in Matthew 18. If you were here last week, who's in the text? It's correct. Whoever said Jesus. You see the red? There's red letters there. Jesus is talking. All right, here we go. Yeah. All right, so we got who? All right, we got Jesus. Who else? The disciples. All right, that will become important. Because if we are disciples of Jesus, then what he's teaching applies to us. Does it apply to someone who's not a disciple? No. He said it to disciples. That narrows the interpretation, also narrows the application. Now, there might be some general principles that would be wise for the non-disciple, but it doesn't really apply to them because that's who the audience is. All right, there's one other. That's right, there's the small child. All right, that's the who. That's the who in the text. And it's right there in verse 1, right? Same time disciples came unto Jesus, came the disciples unto Jesus, saying, "Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And Jesus called a little child, set him in the midst, and then began to teach. And he's using the small child as the illustration. All right, so where is this happening? It's not in chapter 18. I'll help you out. We have to scroll back up a little bit. In verse 24. There it is. But I also noticed something when I scrolled back up, which was interesting. So, actually, let me put that. So where? Capernaum? A-U-N. All right. What I notice here is this is another story, and there's something that's in this story that shows back up in his teaching when he grabs a small child. So we'll just read it real quick. When they were come to Capernaum, they that received, actually I just noticed that right now. That word received is also present in the next part. They that received tribute money came to Peter and said, Doth not your master pay tribute? He saith, Yes. And when he is coming into the house, Jesus prevented him, saying, What do you think about this, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children or of strangers? And Peter says, of strangers. Like, of course. And Peter, so it's like, here comes somebody, and he's like, you owe us tribute. You owe us money. And Peter's like, I don't want to get in trouble with the authorities. Of course Jesus is going to, like, I don't want to get Jesus in trouble with the authorities. And so he's like, I'm going to pay the tribute. And so he goes in. And, so anyways, Peter saith unto him, of strangers. And Jesus saith unto him, then are the children free. So that means they're free from having to pay tribute to the king. Notwithstanding, so they're in Capernaum. That's where a lot of Jesus' ministry happened. It was around the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum was one of the towns around the Sea of Galilee. Like, he's known, he shouldn't have to pay tribute. Notwithstanding, lest we should offend, scandalon. Well, this is the verb form. So it's scandalizo. But that's what we're going to talk about in the next part. Lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea, cast a hook, take up a fish, the first that come up. And when thou open his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. Take it and give it for me and you. So pay the thing, but God's going to provide it. And we don't want to offend them. I mean, that's what it says, right? Notwithstanding, lest we should offend, we're going to do this. He's like, the children are free, but just so we don't offend them, here's how you're going to get the money. Then we get into who's the greatest, and he brings the child in, and he starts talking about humility. All right, so when? This one's also kind of difficult. We'll just have to use relative terms. This is getting towards the end of his ministry. He's about to, so he's in Capernaum, so he's around the Sea of Galilee. He's about to start heading south towards Jerusalem and die. It's getting pretty close. So he's probably a few months away from his death. That's pretty rough, but he's going to make his way to Jerusalem pretty soon. Now, you'd have to know the book of Matthew and how the book of Matthew is laid out to kind of know the relative timing. And then if you had a harmony of the Gospels, they'll usually have a chronology that's going along as you read through it, where it compares all the Gospels and where it has similar passages, how they compare and all of that. So there are resources you could use to find the exact time. But for our purposes, we'll just say that it's getting towards the end of Jesus' ministry, and he's about to head to Jerusalem to be crucified. So, towards the end. All right, it's towards the end of his ministry. So now we have the what. What is he talking about? Now we can get really into the text. I'm going to say that verses, so I'm going to do this part for you. I broke it down into sections, and I want you to summarize it for me. So we got verses 1 through 5. This is the first section. At the same time, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And Jesus called a little child unto them, and set him in the midst of them, and said, "Verily I say unto you, except you be converted and become as little children, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoso shall receive one such little child in my name, receiveth me." So that's where I was like, oh, receive. It's right there. Receive. Ah, it's like it repeated again. All right, so that's verses 1 through 5. How would you summarize verses 1 through 5 into one sentence?
You basically got to die to self.
All right, so the way you said that is in the present tense, and you already made application. So I want to try and do this. So summarize in the past tense. So for example, Jesus taught something to his disciples. Well, how would you summarize what Jesus taught to his disciples in the first 5 verses?
He just taught the disciples how to be great.
How to be great. There you go. So Jesus taught his disciples how to be great. How to be great. Okay, which when you first hear that, you go, oh, we're going to talk about greatness. And then it's like, oh, he completely flips that and goes, actually, you got to humble yourself. And so that's one way to summarize that, right? What are some other? There could be other ways to summarize it. Where does your mind go to when you read those first 5 verses? How would you summarize it?
I think that Jesus taught his disciples how humbleness is key for kind of the same thing, greatness.
Okay. So let's say Jesus taught his disciples.
That humbleness is
I'll put humility. Yeah, humility is the key to greatness.
I mean, he says that multiple times too. It's just like, be the greatest servant of all.
Mm-hmm. So if you wanted to, like that's an idea, right? And there are other places within the Gospels where Jesus talks about that same idea. And you could compare and contrast what are the contexts in which he brings up that idea, and why is he teaching that at that point to his disciples? Like, what's the conversation going on in Luke relative to Matthew 18 at this point? What are the differences? What are the similarities? The similarity is humility, like he's teaching humility. But why is that a great time to teach humility within that text versus this text? And now you're already getting into just like so much stuff, right? But sticking to this, I summarized it like this. Jesus taught his disciples about humility using a child as an illustration. But this gets added too. How to be great. That addresses the question that the disciples raised, right? And Jesus himself says, the same is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Who? Someone who humbles himself. So both of those summarize all 5 of those verses. It's like, okay, cool. Next section. But, so now we have a contrast. That would be an observation, right? But, whoso shall offend one of these little ones, and I'm going to break this down verses 6 through 9. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones, which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the depths of the sea. Depth of the sea. Woe unto the world because of offenses. That's a general That's very general. That's to the whole world, right? For it must needs that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. Wherefore, that's an important word. He's making application. Wherefore, if thy hand or thy foot offend thee, again, he's using that word offend, cut them off and cast them from thee. It's better for thee to enter into life halt or maimed, rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into everlasting fire. And if thine eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee, for it is better for thee to enter into life with 1 eye rather than having 2 eyes be cast into hellfire. All right, this one's a little bit harder to summarize, but I want you guys to think about it and try verse 6. Try and summarize that into 1 sentence.
Don't offend if possible.
So that's a command. It is, so in the past tense, can you put a command in the past tense?
I told you to do something.
Little ones, is little ones
I
just
mean,
someone a normal person believes, like, not necessarily a child?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So that's a good question that you need an interpretation. So you could take it literally as he's only talking about children. I don't think that's right. And the reason I don't think that's right is because later within the same context he talks about, okay, when your brother offends you, what do you do? And he gives very specific directions on, okay, you bring that fault to that person, and if they change, then you've won them. Like, that's probably not happening with children.
I think it probably is applicable in both ways, because
It
also
is.
he's saying, bringing a little child specifically and saying,
Yeah.
this is greatest if somebody's like him, and then he specifically says, one of these little ones which believe in me, so that's probably specifically, but then also in a broader term as like those that are genuinely humble, they are living and serving for me, and, you bring offenses against them, woe to that man.
Yes.
And he gives the application of how to correct it.
So yes, so sometimes I like to do either or. It's like, well, it's either this or it's that, but it could totally be both and especially in the application, it's like, does this apply to children? Absolutely. That seems like the most natural, just like you described. But could you also broaden that out from just the specific small child to someone who's new in the faith? Doesn't have to be a child.
Right.
It's like, yeah, I think so.
Jesus taught about consequences to offenses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so Jesus taught about consequences to offense. That's how you summarize. Mm-hmm. So I'll just do this. All right, so Jesus taught about consequences. Sequences to offenses. Any other attempts at summarizing 6 through 9? Yeah.
I would modify that just a little and say
Okay.
about how serious the offenses are, right? So like how serious the consequences are for the offense.
Okay.
Because those are like, yeah, you just put concrete shoes on and drown them. Like that's,
Right.
like,
I mean, right?
so
Yeah.
I don't know. It just
So-
consequences
but yes.
to offenses doesn't seem to like
No,
hold it all together.
but what you just did is Jesus used, like, he talks about a millstone.
yeah.
When's the last time you saw a millstone? Right.
Years ago.
Yeah, never, right? You haven't, right? And you are talking to people who have never seen a millstone.
Right.
So if I were to like teach and preach this, I would go into like, all right, and last week, that's what I did. I was like, a millstone is this. It's a big stone that is resting on another stone, and you put the grain in there and you spin it, and it grinds the grain into flour. And it's a super heavy stone. If that were about your neck, you'd drown. Like, right? Because so this is what I guess what I'm pointing out is what you did was like something that preachers do all the time. I'm pointing it out because you probably didn't even realize you just did it. And it's really cool, and I want everybody else to notice it. What you did was you took the thing that Jesus is talking about and gave a modern illustration, and it was funny. Guess what? That's going to stick in someone's brain forever. They're going to go, concrete shoes, mob. Like, you know? And, yeah, really funny, because smashing Jesus and mob together, that doesn't go together, so therefore it's funny.
Gotcha.
And then, right, and then it's like, oh, I'll never forget concrete shoes, right? But when I remember concrete shoes, that'll help me remember this text and what it's talking. So you see how that fits together? Yeah, it's brilliant stuff. So the seriousness of the consequences, right? So let's say, the seriousness of the consequences to offenses.
I feel like that's better.
We're
Because-
kind of ignoring the last part where it talks about more personal stuff, like we're summarizing the first part, but we're not paying attention to the eye and the foot.
Well,
Okay.
I think it's talking about cutting it off is pretty
Mm-hmm.
serious
It's another
consequence of
consequence,
offense.
yeah.
So,
But a consequence is something that happens to you. These things are like decisions you need to make for the prioritization.
right, so what are you going to do now that you know the consequences? How are you going to behave? Kind of thing, right? So now, because Jesus is making application about his teaching about offenses. And so I see what you're saying. And when you summarize something when you summarize something, you're going to have to lose stuff. The moment, if your sentence is like a Pauline sentence that just has commas and more phrases and clauses, and you're like, does this sentence ever end? And it's like, there's no way to summarize this, right? So in the act of summarizing, what we're trying to do is get it down to the idea, the central idea. Because we're summarizing sections, and what we're eventually going to have to do is summarize this entire thing in one sentence, which you're going to lose all of these details, but you'll get at the idea. And once you have that idea, that will guide you in how you use these details in your teaching. Because it's like, if this detail it needs to point to the central idea in some way and support it. And if it doesn't, then it's like, maybe my central idea is a little off and I need to look at that again. Everything should be pointing to kind of this central idea. The way that I summarized it was Jesus taught his disciples about pride and the seriousness of offenses. And I put offenses, but if you guys remember from last week, that word scandalon means sin or stumbling block. And this one is, this is the verb form, scandalizomai. So to cease from believing, to fall into sin, to cause to sin. And so what he's talking about is, if you offend one of these little ones, which believe in me. Now, there are different contexts in which scandalizomai gets translated, and that's why it has these different. Let's make that bigger. So you have cease believing, Matthew 13, fall into sin, take offense, be offended by some action, cause no longer to believe, or cause to sin. Which one fits this context? Well, I'll have to think about that, right? So if you do something that offends, I'm going to interpret that as cause to sin, right?
Yeah, that word is very loaded nowadays. It's usually, it's my feelings, and I could care But this,
Mm-hmm.
this is something more serious. But I think when you hear it, at least for me, it'll
Yeah.
stand my feelings. And I can't worry about your feelings. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
When they're superficial.
Right.
Okay?
But here,
When they're superficial,
When they're-
often, you know.
right. So
Yeah, no.
this is the high in profit, low in mercy.
Yes.
You know,
Okay, but this
this
is
is the right. This is the
actual stuff.
right.
But let's be real, when people say offend, they don't mean something as serious and weighty as this. They
Right.
really don't. They're like, my preference is really a lot of times
Mhm.
what people are saying.
Yeah, they're saying you offended me, but it's not like it's not in the same sense that this word is being used. So yeah, if somebody's preferences.
Offended when it is something that is actually true about them, they just don't want to hear it.
That's what I'm
And
saying.
so this is not saying you can't
Mm-hmm.
even tell somebody like
Right.
truth.
No. This is
It almost seems like intentional manipulation.
right. So this is let's take the child as the as the example. Let's say you have a child who believes in Jesus, and what you teach them leads them astray. It would be better if a millstone were wrapped about your neck and you were thrown into the sea. It'd be better if you had concrete shoes put on your feet and you were thrown into the water. Like, how serious is this?
Right.
It's extremely serious.
The sin against God.
It is. So it's a sin against God through sinning against this humble child who believes you because you're older than them. You should be teaching them the right way. They don't know that they're going in the wrong way and that the result of going down that path leads straight to death. They trust you and you're destroying them. Like, it'd be better if you if you had concrete shoes on your feet. Like that, it would be better, right? So that's how serious. So I like the idea of including the seriousness. The consequences are serious. They're dire, right? Now, the next one is really difficult, and my first alarm already went off. So I want you to look at verses 10 through 14. We'll read it right here, but I want you to take verses 10 through 14 and try and summarize that in one sentence. We'll read it right here. Take heed that ye despise not one of these little ones. For I say unto you that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven. For the Son of Man is come to save that which is lost. How think ye? Or what do you think about this? If a man has 100 sheep, and one of them be gone astray, doth he not leave the 99 and goeth into the mountains and seeketh that which is gone astray? And if so be that he find it, verily I say unto you, he rejoiceth more of that sheep than of the 99 which went not astray. Even so, it is not the will of your Father which is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. Now what's interesting, so you'll notice that perish is blue. This word for lost is the same word. It's apolumi. Apolumi. So if I right click it, go to here, and we'll hit, let's see where. Yeah, to destroy, to utterly destroy, to bring destroy. Lose, lost. Yeah, utterly destroy, yeah. Because this is, comes from the verb. This is not, this is the verb, yeah, that which was lost. A noun form can be a name for, like, so if you read in Revelation, one of the names for Satan is Apollyon. Similar to this, the destroyer. Similar, it's not, yeah. Anyways. But that word for lost is the same word as perish. God's not willing that any should go astray and be lost. Why? Because that leads to them perishing. I just combined both of those senses. But verses 10 through 14, he gives a little parable And there's a principle right here, verse 11, for the Son of Man has come to save that which is lost. And then there's another one which kind of tags up with it. Even so, it's not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. Then there's also the command, take heed that you don't despise. So what does despise mean? To think worthless. Well, so how would you summarize all of that? I have like three. I have three because I was just like, man, I could go this way, or like which parts are you going to emphasize? Again, you're going to have to lose some details, but when you do that, when you summarize, then you're getting closer to what the central idea is and what the driving, like why is Jesus teaching this right here, right now? Why is he teaching this? And how does it fit together? Then once we know that, then we can go, this is how it fits together for me, for you, today. And then we can give examples of what offenses might be based on how we live our lives. Because Jesus gave examples for how they live their lives. All right, let's pray. Our Father in heaven, thank you so much for your word. I pray that this has been thought-provoking and challenging for your people. And I pray that you'd help us to dig into your word, to research, to study, to find, to seek what you're trying to teach us so we can live our lives that honor and glorify you. Lord, help us to sing praises to your name as we go upstairs. Help us to listen and heed and apply what's preached to our own lives. Lord, may your Spirit show up and convict us of sin, but also show us what is righteous, what is good, and what we can do to live a holy life for you. Lord, thank you so much for your love and your grace, and I pray that we would seek your face now in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Gerald.
Well, you're welcome.